Marx and Engels. I've had to restart this recording quite a few times because I just kept sneezing, and if you've watched chapter 2, you know that in the middle of the video I just have like the biggest sneezes. And I find it quite interesting how you can go through an entire day without sneezing, and then when it's time to record ASMR, you just get them all. So yeah, it's my luck today. Anyhow, we are going to finish this today in this video with chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 4 is only one page, so might as well just do it all at once. After which, if you want me to read the prefaces in ASMR style to all the different languages in the Communist Manifesto, I can also do that. Otherwise, I'd be very happy to move on to another reading. If you have any suggestions as to what you would like to hear next, I'd be more than happy to sort of take that on board. I've said sort of again. It's just, I'm gonna stop saying it. It's my New Year resolution. I have a few ideas of books which we can follow through after finishing this one. Other ideas that have been suggested to me I'm not even gonna discuss. So if you have anything you'd like to hear and that fits the theme, of course, just let me know. Without any further ado, let's just get started with this. Chapter 3 is actually quite interesting. It's in the dissertation style, I would say. When I was studying in France in law school, they made us do these essays all the time in sort of binary form, not sort of binary form, which was a big one, A, B, big 2, B, C, and then big 3. The big 3 was there or wasn't there, depending from the subject, but this chapter is written a bit in a similar style. So I don't know how much you could see there, but you know, it starts with a big 1 and then it has A, B, and it continues until 3. So yes, chapter 3, Socialist and Communist Literature. Big 1, Reactionary Socialism. Subtitle A, Feudal Socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. I'm just gonna put my glasses on. I normally wear glasses, but I haven't for the last few videos. I don't know why. So I'm just gonna make it easier. Oh yeah, I know why, because I look like you don't want to be around me. I look like stereotype of the 70s or 80s or whatnot. Anyhow, thenceforth, a serious political contest was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. There's a note after Restoration period that says, not the English Restoration 1660 to 1689, but the French Restoration 1814 to 1830, and it is a note by Engels. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy were obliged to lose sight, apparently, of their own interests, and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons on their new masters and whispering in his ear the sinister prophecy of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half echo of the past, half conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amount to this, that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up, root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against this working class, and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of this charity and poverty, celibacy, and mortification of the flesh, monastic life, and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the hard burnings of the aristocrats. Subtitle B: Petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose condition of existence pinned and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasants proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed, industrial and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and, as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufacture, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois, and from the standpoint of these intermediate classes, should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradiction in the condition of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effect of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crisis. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, the dissolution of old moral bonds, of the old family relation, of the old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relation and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relation that have been, and were bound to be, exploded by those means. In either case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilt for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when stubborn historical facts had dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, This form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. I'm just gonna have a drink of water. Subtitle C: German or True Socialism. The Socialist and Communist Literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of a bourgeois in power, and that was the expression of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers would be philosophers, and beaux esprits eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social condition had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social condition, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosopher of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified in their eyes the laws of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. The work of the German literati consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical work of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. I like how no one likes French anyway. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticism they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth, not the human interest, not the interest of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs not class, has no reality, who exists only in the mysterium of philosophical fantasy. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stock in trade in such mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight of the German, and especially of the Prussian bourgeoisie, against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. By this, the long-wished-for opportunity was offered to true socialism, of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands, of hurling the traditional anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, and of preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by this bourgeois movement. German socialism forgot, in the nick of time, that the French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the existence of modern bourgeois society, with its corresponding economic condition of existence, and the political constitution adapted thereto, the very things whose attainment was the object of the pending struggle was a sweet finish after the bitter pills of flagons and bullets with which the same government, just at that time, dosed the German working class risings. While this true socialism does deserve the government as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it, at the same time, directly represented a reactionary interest, the interest of the German Philistines. In Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 16th century, and since then constantly cropping up again under various forms, is the real social basis of the existing state of things. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction. On the one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the other, from the rise of revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The robe of speculative cobwebs embroidered with flowers of rhetoric stepped in the dew of sickly sentiment, this transcendental robe in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the sale of their gods amongst such a public. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as the bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. It proclaimed the German nation to be the model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man, it gave a hidden, higher socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character. It went to the extreme length of directly opposing the brutally destructive tendency of communism and of proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles. With very few exceptions, all the so-called socialist and communist publications that now, 1847, circulate in Germany belong to the domain of this foul and enervating literature. And there's a note here with the last word, enervating literature, that says, the revolutionary storm of 1848 swept away this whole shabby tendency and cured its protagonist of the desire to dabble further in socialism. The chief representative and classical type of this tendency is Karl Grun, and it's a note by Engels. Page 2. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. A part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. To this section belong economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole and corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has, moreover, been worked out into complete systems. We may cite Proudhon's Philosophie de la Misère as an example of this form. The socialistic bourgeois want all the advantage of modern social condition without the struggles and dangers necessary resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for a bourgeoisie without a proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceive the world in which it's supreme to be the best, and bourgeois socialism develops this comfortable conception into various more or less complete systems. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system, and thereby to march straight the way into the social New Jerusalem, it but requires in reality that the proletariat should remain within the bounds of existing society, but should cast away all its hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. A second and more practical, but less systematic, form of this socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working class, by showing that no mere political form, but only a change in the material condition of existence in economical relations could be of any advantage to them. administrative work of bourgeois government. Bourgeois socialism attains adequate expression when and only when it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class, protective duties for the benefit of the working class, prison reform for the benefit of the working class. This is the last word and the only seriously meant word of bourgeois socialism. It is summed up in the phrase, "The bourgeois is a bourgeois for the benefit of the working class." Big 3. Critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to that literature which, in every great modern revolution, has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writing of Babeuf and others. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of universal excitement when feudal society was being overthrown, these attempts necessarily failed, owing to the undeveloped states of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipations, conditions that had yet to be produced and could be produced by the impending bourgeois epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied this first movement of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism and social leveling in its crudest form. The socialist and communist systems, properly so called, those of Saint-Simon, Fourier, Owen and others, spring into existence in the early undeveloped period. Described above, of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. The founders of these systems see, indeed, the class antagonisms as well as the action of the decomposing element in the prevailing form of society. But the proletariat, as yet in its infancy, offers to them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative or any independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonism keeps even pace with the development of industry, the economic situation as they find it does not as yet offer to them the material condition for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search after a new social science, after new social laws that are to create these conditions. Historical action is to yield to their personal inventive action, historically created condition of emancipation to fantastic ones, and the gradual spontaneous class organization of the proletariat to an organization of society specially contrived by these inventors. Future history resolves itself in their eyes into propaganda and to practical carrying out of their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, causes socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonism. They want to improve the condition of every member of society, even that of the most favored. Hence, they habitually appeal to society at large without distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understood their system, fail to see in the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means and endeavor by small experiments necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example, to pave the way for the new social gospel. Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at a time when the proletariat is still in a very undeveloped state and has but a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of that class for a general reconstruction of society. But the Socialist and Communist publication contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are on of industries for the account of private individuals and of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the functions of the state into a mere superintendence of production. All this proposal points solely to the disappearance of class antagonisms, which were at that time only just cropping up and which in this publication are recognized in their earliest indistinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. In proportion as the modern class struggle develops and takes definite shape, this fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, although the originators of these systems were in many respects revolutionary, their disciples have in every case formed mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original view of their master, in opposition to progressive historical development of the proletariat. They, therefore, endeavor and that consistently to deaden the class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonism. They still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding isolating phalansteres, of establishing home colonies, of setting up a little Icaria, duodecimo edition of the New Jerusalem, and to realize all these castles in the air, they are compelled to appeal to the feelings and purses of the bourgeois. There's a note with phalansteres and little Icarias that says phalansteres were socialist colonies on the plan of Charles Fourier. Icaria was the name given by Capet to his utopia and later on to his American communist colonies. Home colonies were what Owen called his communist model societies. Phalanstère was the name of the public palaces planned by Fourier. Icaria was the name given to the utopian land of fancy, whose communist institution Capet portrayed. We're back on the text. By degrees, they sink into the category of the reactionary conservative socialist depicted above, differing from this only by more systematic pedantry and by their fanatical and superstitious belief in the miraculous effect of their social science. They, therefore, violently oppose all political action on the part of the working class. Such action, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in the new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierists in France respectively oppose the Chartists and the Reformists. Chapter 4. Position of the Communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. Section 2 has made clear the relations of the Communists to the existing working class parties, such as the Chartists in England and the agrarian reformers in America. The Communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class, but in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. In France, the Communists ally themselves with the Social Democrats against the conservatives and radical bourgeoisie, reserving, however, the right to take up a critical position in regard to phrases and illusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. In Switzerland, they support the radicals without losing sight of the fact that this party consists of an antagonistic element, partly of democratic socialist in the French sense, partly of radical bourgeois. In Poland, they support the party that insists on an agrarian revolution as the prime condition for national emancipation, that party which fomented the insurrection of Krakow in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeoisie whenever it acts in a revolutionary way against the absolute monarchy, the feudal squirearchy, and the petty bourgeoisie. But they never cease, for for a single instant to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between bourgeois and proletariat, in order that the German workers may straightway use as so many weapons against the bourgeoisie the social and political condition that the bourgeoisie must necessarily introduce along with its supremacy, and in order that, after the fall of the reactionary classes in Germany, the fight against the bourgeois itself may immediately begin. The communists turn their attention chiefly to Germany, because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced condition of European civilization, and with a much more developed proletariat than that of England was in the 17th and of France in the 18th century, and because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all these movements, they bring to the front as the leading question in each the property question, no matter what its degree of development at that time. Finally, they labor everywhere for the unions and agreement